President Donald Trump is apparently good at saying the quiet parts out loud. In fact, here he is on Fox News admitting that Republicans would never win elections if voting were easier. Take a look.
An email from Kevin for you, Mr. President. If there is another relief bill, how can we stop lawmakers from dipping into it again for special interest projects? Man, we were just talking about this. Do you want to expand? Can we stop the next one?
It's just the common facts. I mean, they have a majority in the House, and therefore you need their vote, and they want to get certain things. I will tell you this. If you look at before and after, the things they had in there were crazy. They had things, levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again. They had things in there about, election days and what you do and all sorts of clawbacks. And they had things that were just totally crazy.
He had things in there. Totally crazy. I mean, can you imagine expanding voting rights to people? Can you imagine making it easier for people to vote? Insane. Oh no, we had to put a stop on that. And literally they were able to do that. But again, these were voter protection and expansion proposals to make sure that more people actually get their right or be able to exercise their right to vote. No, crazy. You know why? It's because he admitted it right there. Well, if we actually expanded voting to people, well, then more people would vote. And we would lose. Well, we don't want that. No. And so, look, when more people tend to show up, Democrats tend to win. And more often than not, progressive Democrats win when turnout is really high, especially among young people. Now, when it's more 65 plus, to be fair, you do end up having more conservatives, either voting for Republicans or conservative Democrats when there's a Democrat in the race. So, look, that's how the demographics break out, or break down, I should say. You always got older people are generally more conservative. Not saying all older people are more conservative. There's plenty of older people who are old hippies, and I say that fondly, who are, classic progressives that have been fighting for these policies and social movements for literally decades. And so, unfortunately, they're a smaller minority. And I say unfortunately because we could use all the help we can get. But okay. Now, what frustrates me is, of course, voter suppression. You guys know I've talked about voter suppression on the show all the time. Normally, it generally gets used against people of color, minorities, students, generally people who tend to vote Democratic. And generally, and when it comes to younger people, vote progressive. And so, again, that's a problem. And that's why we have, of course, terrible representation. There's also, of course, voter apathy among younger people. Although, yes, there is apathy. Some people, don't want to turn out to polls. And then, again, a lot of voter suppression against younger people as well. Arcane primary rules, registration problems, voting machines that are hackable and all this different stuff. And it ends up where you have a system where not a lot of people vote. And that's super unfortunate, right? Now, everybody knows this. Republicans know this. But they always say, oh, no, the real problem is voter fraud. Right? It's the voters' fault that we don't have good elections. And if they would just, pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, I don't know if that's a good argument they use. They don't really have an argument for increasing voters, but they all have arguments against increasing voting rights. And so, as the Washington Post's Blake Aaron said about Trump didn't expand on the thought, but he clearly linked high turnout to Republicans losing elections. The most generous reading of his comment is that he was referring to large-scale voter fraud resulting from the easier vote-by-mail options, which shouldn't be an option right now because it should be the only thing right now because we're in the middle of a pandemic. Trump has, in the past, basically speculated about millions of fraudulent votes, helping Democrats in the 2016 election. He claimed that 3 million people voted for Hillary Clinton, right? And that's why she got 3 million more votes. They're busing in the illegals to go and vote for Clinton. Really? Why didn't they bus them to Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin? I mean, they get this whole thing figured out. This whole deep state apparatus that is against Donald Trump, and yet they are too stupid, apparently, to go to Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin and understand how the Electoral College works. That's literally their argument. That is dumb. Super dumb and nonsensical when you think about it. I mean, the whole thing. Like, you could go to the whiteboard and be like, okay, you go here, you vote 3 million more people. Stupid. Really stupid. But okay, anyway. So now the nefarious reading, Blake continues, will be that allowing more people to participate in the process would hurt his chances because there are more Democratic leaning voters in the country. More Democrats, right? More people who would vote for Democrats. And so, hey, it turns out that there's a lot of people who look at Republican proposals to basically hand over everything to the rich. And we're like, well, I'm not rich. Why would I want to do that? Why would I want to give more money to corporations and wealthy people when they already have most of the money? That doesn't seem like a smart idea. Now, then again, there are people like, no, it'll trickle down on us. I mean, that's what they've been saying for like 30 years. But eventually, it's going to trickle down and we're going to be wealthy. There are some people that do believe that. Complete and utter insanity. But look, either way, it's pretty clear right now that voting is too difficult to do. I'm not saying that, are you saying people are stupid, they can't figure it out? No, there's literally roadblocks put in the way. In some cases, might actually be physical roadblocks. And close down polling places and minority areas that don't have enough polling places or don't have enough poll workers, don't have enough ballots, their machines don't work, or the machines are hackable and unverifiable. There are all sorts of issues with our voting system, and voter fraud ain't one of them. Now, do we, of course, have to make sure we verify the integrity of our elections? Of course. But that's not voter fraud. That's actually more election fraud. And so that, of course, we've seen instances where that is very likely, where votes, again, are not counted. Machines are hacked or, could be hacked. I mean, there are people that have, college students, I think maybe even a high school student, that took like 4 minutes to hack into a voter machine. I mean, look, if a kid can do that, what's to stop another country from doing that, or to stop an opposing political party or a bad operative from being able to do that? Nothing really. And so there's some big issues with this. Big issues with voter suppression and, of course, election fraud. Real issues, right? And those issues, though, they're beneficial to one group. I would say more the establishment, but generally more establishment Republicans. They tend to benefit from this more, even though you do have benefits to, for example, incumbent Democrats. And Trump knows this, right? He knows that if only his base of mainly older conservative white people are able to show up and vote, he wins. He's not a smart guy, but he can figure that one out, right? However, if more students, young people, people of color, working class Americans show up to the polls, he loses. Now, that said, I got to be fair and point out that with a lot of Republicans, that's true. Donald Trump did something different than a lot of Republicans. He did do faux populism, right? And that did help get some Democrats to switch over and some working class people and new voters to show up, which is why a lot of the polls were wrong. Nonetheless, right? And by the way, you also got a lot of independent support too. Hey, you know who would do the opposite? Or who would get those same people to come back over to the Democrats? A left-wing populist. Somebody like Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders could grab independents and Trump supporters and obviously liberal Democrats, and he would still win. Whereas Biden, we don't know. We don't know if he would win. I know there are polls that showing him double digits ahead of Trump, right? 10 points, right? That's good, but some of those polls, again, remind me of 2016. And then we also have an issue where the dynamic has changed. Trump has bungled the response to CS19 or CV19, but his approval rating still went up for some reason, and I don't understand why. That, of course, could change. Biden, look, basically, it's not guaranteed. There's no guarantees, and 2016 should teach us about that, right? And even in this 2020 election, where look, even us Bernie Sanders supporters, we got a little too cocky, we got a little too confident, and then we got our asses handed to us. And so I'm not saying Bernie Sanders is done. He's still in the race. He has a very, very difficult hill to climb, but he could still pull it out because everything has changed. Just like 2016 threw out the rule book, now we have a pandemic, literally. And so here we go. The rule book gets chucked out again. And so we don't know what's going to happen, right? We don't know what's going to happen, but we do know Joe Biden, at least in my opinion, has not been showing the kind of leadership that we need. Whereas Bernie Sanders has. He's been very prominent. He's been helping to raise money for the charities and holding roundtable discussions with lawmakers and professionals and doctors, all that stuff, right? And so, I mean, I know I got off on a little bit of a tangent here, but let's get back to voting, right? So now Democrats, as Trump mentioned, try to get some voter protection to the stimulus package. And it was a no-go. It was a compromise bill. Compromise where the majority of the help, trillions of dollars, end up going to the richest corporations in the country, right? And bailing out the banks, bailing out big companies, mainly big business, airlines, etc., right? Where a tiny fraction of it went to helping regular people in the form of, yes, extended unemployment benefits, which is good, right? And a one-time $1,200 check. Wow. No protections on voting or anything like that. And so, look, the Democrats, of course, get shafted on that bill, that compromise bill, and unfortunately, that sucks. So now, leaving that stuff out, obviously has gotten a lot of criticism from progressives. Michael Waldman, president of the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU Law, called the shortcomings a major failure of the legislation. Quote, the $2 trillion stimulus bill will help soften its effect on the American people. However, Congress failed to include sufficient urgently needed funds in the stimulus to help states run elections in a time of pandemic. This could wreak havoc in November. States simply will not have the resources so people can vote safely. Congress must do better when it composes the next stimulus package. Now, here's the thing. Democrats are talking about a fourth round of stimulus with some of the stuff in. But now the Republicans already got all these breaks for giant corporations. They're like, oh, stimulus? No, we're done with stimulus. We did everything that we needed to do. Time to adjourn. And now Congress is literally out of session until April 20th. 420. Oh, I just realized when that was. So they don't get back till 420. And I mean, look, I think we may have, I'm not sure if we have any primaries coming up sooner than that. A lot of the primaries got pushed back to June. And so at least that's good. But the longer we dawdle on this and take our time, the less chance we have of being able to put together a good package, a bipartisan package, because you have to get Republican votes, that will actually protect our right to vote and make it easier for us to vote. And so that's the problem. We need easier ways to vote during this crisis because it's going to probably last beyond summer. And so, I mean, and also, if we are able to pass some of these things for during a crisis, right? Well, it makes you think, why can't we have them when we're not in a crisis? Why can't we just make voting easier all the time? How come we're not pushing for more vote by mail and ease of registration and voter protections before this? I mean, that's my question. You know, I realize a lot of the states control voting and registration themselves, but maybe this is something the federal government should be able to have, uh, put some guidelines right down, and because this affects the federal government. But what do I know? I'm some YouTuber, right? But other than the fact that Republicans don't want voting, and really some of them has just been vocal, have been just as vocal as Donald Trump. In fact, even more so. You guys remember Paul Weyrich, right? Paul Weyrich was the godfather of the modern conservative movement. And he basically said, he made a speech called the Goo Syndrome, right? Good government. And we want less people voting because the more people vote, the less we win. And so that's what this is, right? If you have less people voting, we have more conservatives in power, and we have more people voting, then we lose power. And so the obvious solution here is not to change ourselves, not to change our party to be better, to appeal to more people. No, our solution is we just make it so less people are able to vote. And that's the very thing the Republicans have been running on for this entire time, for all of these decades since Weyrich. And by the way, on his deathbed, Weyrich was like, my bad, dog. I didn't mean that. We should all be able to vote. So they're still using that strategy. And Donald Trump is just more effective in actually calling it out while actually not calling it out. And just it basically exposing the problem because he's too stupid to keep his mouth shut. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.